The next portion of the assessment is going to involve a balance assessment, and we're going to administer the balance error scoring system, commonly known as the BESS. All that's needed for this testing is a piece of medium density foam. This is the Balance Pad Elite by Airx, a stopwatch, and our athlete. And so the first 3 trials of this are going to involve a firm surface, so we will not use the foam padding for the first 3 trials. The first one will involve a double leg stance, and we will count the number of errors after the athlete assumes the position, which I'm going to go over with him at this time. And there's a scorecard available, which you can chart the errors for this test. The second trial will be a single leg stance on the non-dominant foot, the foot that the athlete would choose not to kick a ball with. And then the third trial will involve a tandem stance, or commonly known as a tightrope stance, with that non-dominant foot placed in the rear. So we'll begin the testing now. So now I'm going to test your balance. We're going to do the testing with the shoes off, and if the athlete's wearing pants, we'll ask them to roll their pants up so that we can see above the ankles. The testing is going to consist of 6 20-second trials with 3 different stances on 2 different surfaces. I'll describe the stances as we go along. The first stance is called the double leg stance. I'd like you to stand with your hands on your hips and your eyes closed. You don't need to close them just yet. You should try to maintain your stability in that position for the entire 20 seconds. I will be counting the number of times that you move out of that position. For example, if you take your hands off of your hips, open your eyes, take a step, lift your toes or your heels, each of those would be assessed an error. And your goal is to have as few errors as possible. So essentially, we'd like you to stand still during the 20-second trial as best you can. Okay? I'm going to stand over here about 10 feet away and count your errors. So at this time, I'd like you to put your feet together, hands on your hips, and whenever you're ready, I'd like you to close your eyes and we'll start the 20-second trial. Go. Stop. Okay, good job. So there's one error. As you saw, at one point he stepped out and moved his foot back. And so we'll move on to the second trial. And this is the single leg stance test. So for the most part, he was fairly stable, but it would be at this point within the testing that if he had demonstrated a lot of instability that we might want to bring a spotter in for these additional tests. But for the purpose of this right now, we'll move on to the second trial without the spotter. So the next test is a single leg stance test. So if you were to kick a ball, which foot would you kick the ball with?
I would use my right.
Your right foot. So then we're going to use your left foot as your stance foot. So what I'm going to ask you to do is going to be to stand on your left foot with your hands on your hip and your right foot elevated about 6 to 7 inches off of the ground with your knee slightly flexed and your hip slightly flexed like this. Perfect. And again, whenever you feel as though you're ready, you can close your eyes and we will start the timer. I want to try to maintain your stability. If you feel as though you're going to fall, you can touch down. But again, each of those would be recorded as an error. So I will be counting the number of errors during the trial. Go. Stop. Okay, so there were 4 errors, 2 of which were moving into abduction here, as you can see on your card, represents an error, and there were 2 touchdowns. So there were 4 total errors on that trial. So at this time, we're now going to move on to the tandem stance, and since your non-dominant foot is your left foot, I'm going to ask you to put your left foot in the back, into this tightrope stance with your hands on your hips, and again, try to maintain that position for 20 seconds and I'll count the number of errors that you have. So when you feel as though you're comfortable, close your eyes and we'll start the test. Go. So I counted 3 errors during this last trial. The first one was when he moved out of the test position, hands off the hips and eyes remained closed, but he moved like this. So those many people would say, well, there were 2 errors committed, but it was all during the same maneuver. So we only count that as 1. And be sure that when you're giving instructions for this, that you instruct the athlete to get back into the testing position as quickly as possible. He then had a second error where his foot was lifted up off of the surface, and then toward the end of that trial, again, his foot moved. So I counted 3 errors during that third trial. So at this point, we have completed the first 3 trials of the BESS. Those first 3 trials on the firm surface, a double leg, a single leg, and a tandem stance, are what go into the SCAT 2, which we will now add to the score sheet for the SCAT 2, and we'll then walk through the foam surfaces for the BESS. We've now put the foam padding in place, and we're essentially going to repeat the first 3 trials that we had just conducted on a firm surface. So at this time, I'd like you to step up onto the foam with your feet together, hands on your hips, and again, we're going to ask you to be as motionless as possible. When you feel as though you're ready and stable, you can close your eyes and we'll start the clock. Go. Okay, stop. Okay, so we had 3 errors on this one. On 3 different occasions, he lifted his feet, but then resumed the position. So those would be 3 additional errors. We're now going to go to the single leg stance, again, with the left foot being the stance foot. And this is one of those tests where you'll tend to see a lot of errors, typically, especially during an injured athlete's assessment. And so it's important to try to count each of those errors and be sure, remembering that each time that they have an error, when they get back and assume that stance position, that we sort of start counting again for the next error. And so we'll go and count these errors. And I think for this one, I'm going to count them as they occur to help you. You can lift your right leg and close your eyes. Go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, stop. So as you can see, it's difficult, and there is some variability around the scoring, especially as we move into the foam padding situations, which are a little more challenging. But remembering that remaining out of the test position and until they get back set, it's still only 1 error unless they remain out of that position for 5 seconds, and it's at that point that we add an additional error. So we'll move to the final trial, which is a tandem stance. And with this, for most of our athletes, we need to move on a diagonal to fit both feet on the padding. So we'll move this here, and again, we're going to ask him to put his non-dominant foot, which is the left foot, in the back. Do a heel-to-toe stance, hands on the hips, and close your eyes when you're ready. Go. One, 2, 3, stop. So there were 2 errors there, came close to a third. I scored it as 2 because he was able to maintain his balance. Remember that on this one, it's a little bit more difficult to see if the foot actually leaves the surface of the foam padding, but if more than half of the foot leaves the surface, whether it's with the foam padding or on the firm surface, then it's scored as an error. So we had 2 on that one. So with that, we would then record these errors, and we would get a total score for the BESS. So at this point, you can see the scorecard and a total of 20 errors for the entire BESS. with a total score of 8 for the firm surface, which would be entered into the SCAT-2 scoring. The most errors per any one trial that he had was 7. It's important to note that there could not be more than 10 errors recorded for any one trial, and if they reach 10, then they're scored a maximum of 10 on any one trial, which means that the most that you could possibly have would be a total BESS score of 60. Summary, with respect to the balanced error scoring system, there are a few common questions that are asked about it. I've already mentioned one in terms of multiple errors occurring, such as eyes open, hands off the hip, and foot being lifted off the surface, all during one maneuver. Remember, that just counts as one error, and the athlete assumes the normal position, and we then start counting again. So just remember that. Also, as an athlete leaves the testing position, if they fell off the foam or leaned off to tap down, encourage them to open their eyes so they can quickly get back into the test position. This happens oftentimes on the foam surface for the tandem stance. It's important that they try to realign their feet as quickly as possible. So in your instructions, again, encourage them to open the eyes if need be, and but just again, if they remain out of the testing position for more than 5 seconds, that then does become an additional error. Remember also that, as I've already mentioned, maximum score of 10 for each of those 6 conditions. So if you're getting up in the 11, 12, 13 errors on any one trial, it maxes out at 10. And then finally, and really an important point, remember that athletes, even at a baseline, preseason baseline where they're uninjured, they will have errors. They're going to score errors. That foam condition especially is challenging. After several years of utilizing this testing in a number of settings, high school, collegiate, professional setting, we know that athletes tend to score, on average, about 12 errors at baseline. And that's that aggregate score of all 6 trials with a standard deviation of about 7. So don't expect anybody to come in and score a 0. That would be actually an abnormal score. So.